Hello, I am Sheezer Bukhari, and I will be conducting today's webinar. First of all, let me thank you, Andre, for attending this webinar. The topic,
Thank you.
yeah,
Welcome.
okay, all right. So the topic for the webinar is pricing in international business. And basically, the outline for this webinar is that we'll start the discussion with what pricing is. We'll look at some aspects of it. Then we'll discuss something called pricing tactics. And we'll follow that with a discussion about product differentiation. And once we have discussed all of this, at the end of the entire webinar, we'll have a bit of a discussion about how we can use these ideas in international business and how they're relevant to ex-culture students who are trying to prepare an international business proposal. So let's begin. If you have any questions, you can ask. I don't mind. So pricing. What exactly is pricing? I mean, I'm sure that almost every one of us has some idea about what pricing is, but in the context of the webinar, we'll look at pricing as a part of marketing. And pricing is actually an integral part of the marketing mix model, or the 4 Ps of marketing. And I'm going to bring those up on the screen. So as you can see, it's one of the 4 Ps of the marketing mix. And pricing is actually a bit special in this group because unlike the other 3 Ps, pricing is the only element of the mix that generates revenue. The other 3 elements, place, promotion, and product, well, they're referred to as cost centers in business jargon. And basically what that means is that all these 3 components, they do contribute something to the product, to the business, but unfortunately, the components that they contribute actually have an impact on costs. So depending upon the component, you can maybe decrease costs or increase costs by tweaking with these. But pricing is the only one of the 4 Ps that actually generates revenue directly. And that's why it's special. So pricing is actually impacted by international business. Although it's an extremely important component of international business, there are a bunch of factors which influence it. And ideally, we want to charge a price for our product that's more than the production cost plus the transportation cost for our product. But in fact, there are actually a few problems with that, and we'll look at those in the subsequent slides. So pricing, of course, is difficult, and one way to make it somewhat easier is to implement pricing tactics. Now, pricing tactics are ways of gaining foothold in foreign markets, and if you implement them properly, you can get an advantage over your competitors and you can capture market share from them. And there is a large number of pricing tactics. So they vary from short-term to long-term. And basically, the kind of tactics you use are determined by the strategy of your company. And we're going to look at some of the pricing tactics in a bit more detail. But I just wanted to take a moment to say that in international business, you have a new company that's trying to enter a market. And that's not always easy. There are a bunch of problems with that. And we'll look at a few of them in the subsequent slides of the webinar. But the point is that in order to choose the right tactic, you have to look at a number of factors. You have to look at your entry mode. If you're an international business student and you want to enter a market, you have to look at the entry mode, the market characteristics. And if you don't pay attention to these, then you may not be able to choose the right tactic. So let's move on to pricing tactics. So there are different kinds of pricing tactics, and one kind of pricing tactic is called penetration pricing. Now, this is an entry-level tactic, and it works by basically the company that is implementing the tactic sets the price of its product very low to encourage its purchase. So ideally, the price of the product has to be lower than the price that the competitors of that company are charging within that market. And the theory is that if they charge a lower price, then customers who are buying their competitors' product are going to switch to their product. And in doing so, they will increase the market share of this new company. And there are a bunch of ideas about how this is something that can actually improve the ability of the company to compete and so on. But basically, there are a few problems with that, and we'll look at that as well. But another example of the same model is bait and hook model. So the bait and hook model works by basically charging a very low cost for a product. And because of the low cost of the product, people are tempted to buy it. But once they buy the product, they realize that there are certain parts in the product that need to be replaced, or a certain service is required. And the cost for those parts or the service, well, that's actually quite expensive. And a very good example of that is the printers market. So basically, the cost of printers in US is around $100, and that's not much. It's not a lot, because the amount that goes into building the printer itself is actually quite a lot as well. But once you have the printer, then you need to buy replacement parts like cartridges or other printing components. And companies charge a lot for these parts. So for example, in the current example, if a printer costs around $100, then an ink cartridge is going to cost around $30. So penetration pricing is actually quite good for entry-level companies, because if a new entrant is trying to break into a market, then for them, this is a very good tactic, because they can basically capture a lot of market share very quickly. And once they have captured enough market share, then they can slowly increase the price, or quickly, it doesn't matter. But the point is that it basically allows them to gain a foothold in the market very quickly. Now, there are a few problems with that, because some people think that once a company starts charging a lower price for their products as part of the penetration pricing tactic, then once they raise it, then the consumers, they're going to feel bad about that, and they will be angry. So this might affect the profits of the company adversely, because they already entered the market at a lower price. Now you have consumers switching away from their product. It could result in lesser profits, or maybe even a loss. But actual research shows that penetration pricing is quite widespread, and there's very little impact by switching of consumers and whatnot. So it's a very common tactic, but there are some problems with that. And the basic reason for those problems is that another tactic called predatory pricing is actually very similar to this. So basically, in predatory pricing, a new entrant in a market, an exporter, for example, charges less than their production cost for a product in order to gain market share very quickly. So this is actually interesting, because as we looked at one of the slides in the beginning, ideally, our price should be greater than the production cost plus the transportation cost, right? But in this particular tactic, predatory pricing, we're charging less than our production cost in order to gain more market share and to basically drive our competitors out of the market. And well, it's an interesting tactic, but unfortunately, as you can understand, there are problems with this, because a company that's very big, that has economies of scale, and which can charge a low price for its product, even lesser than the production cost, because it has enough financial reserves, then such a company can easily dominate a market. It keeps on charging the lower price. Consumers switch away from the competitor's products. The competitors go bankrupt. And the company can then basically become a monopoly and charge whatever price it wants. So this is the argument that's advanced by certain people who say that this is a very bad tactic. And one term that's used to describe this is called dumping. The problem, however, is that predatory pricing is so similar to penetration pricing that it's very difficult to distinguish between the two. So there have been considerable legal cases and debates, but nothing concrete has been decided, which actually decides that, okay, this is predatory pricing, this is not predatory pricing. It's something that happens on a case-by-case basis, and it's difficult to determine that. So predatory pricing is actually a very powerful tool and a dangerous one too, because it can also be used by established competitors in a market. So imagine a competitor who wants to make sure that new entrants do not enter his market. So whenever a new entrant tries to enter the market, this competitor starts using predatory pricing, and the entrant goes bankrupt. And because of that, the competitor can then charge whatever price it wants. And some companies actually do this as part of their long-term strategy. They believe that if they have to charge low prices for, say, 1 or 2 years to drive out new entrants, they can more than make up for it by recouping their losses in the subsequent years when they dominate the market. So the next pricing tactic we'll be looking at is price skimming. So this is an interesting tactic. Basically, when a product enters a market, the firm that produces this product charges a very high price for it, the highest in fact. And then slowly, as the product remains in the market, the firm starts to decrease the price until eventually the firm is charging a very low price for this product. And this kind of pricing tactic is actually very common in technology markets. And for example, the iPhone, it's a very good example of this. So when the iPhone comes into the market, Apple, the company that produces it, charges a very high price for it. But as time passes, it keeps on reducing the price. And the logic behind this is that people who really want the iPhone in the beginning, well, they're going to pay the very high price. And people who also want the iPhone but are not willing to pay a very high price, they can buy it a little later as the price goes down. And this is something that's also done in fashion. So boutiques basically they basically unveil their new lines every season, and they charge a high price for them. But as the season draws to a close, they bring down the prices and even start sales to get rid of the stock they already have. The next tactic we'll look at is price discrimination. And this is a very interesting topic. I've actually done a video lecture on it. So I'll just give you a brief overview of this. Price discrimination occurs when firms charge different prices to different customers for the same product. Now that sounds a bit odd, and you might be surprised, and I can understand. But the thing is that there are different kinds of price discrimination. It's actually a microeconomic theory. It's very involved, and I won't go into the details of this because, as I said before, I have already discussed this in my video lecture. But I will say that this is very common in the market, and you can actually explain a number of behaviors of firms in the market if you understand this idea. Now, price discrimination on its own is a good tactic, but sometimes customers don't like it if you charge them different prices for the same product. So in order to ensure that the negative publicity from something like this doesn't affect them, companies sometimes try to do product differentiation. So what they do is they take a product and they make some changes to it, and then they charge a different price for it, justifying it by saying that, look, this is a different product. You can tell these features are not available, or these features are available. And the downside or the upside for this, actually, it could be, is that the production cost of the product changes. So if you are going to tweak the product and increase features or maybe introduce some new element, then the price is going to increase. The cost is going to increase, and you have to charge a higher price for it to recoup those costs. But if you dumb down the product, if you reduce the features on it, then it's possible that the price for it might actually drop because you don't have as many features. It costs less to produce. You can charge a lower price for it. So either way is fine, and you can sometimes use this with price discrimination as well. So basically, what you do is you charge different prices for the different variants of the product, and you can justify. You can say, look, this is different, this is different, and this kind of behavior is actually quite prevalent in international markets. So one example that comes to my mind is Oreo. So in India, Oreo basically sells certain flavors which are somewhat more spicy to suit the tastes of the consumers in that area, and they charge a different price for it as opposed to the regular offerings. And this particular product is not available in other markets. Another example is in textbooks. So sometimes firms produce textbooks in markets that don't have the ability to pay a lot of money for them, and they produce these textbooks and they write down that this is the Indian edition or this is the Asian edition, and they can sometimes indulge in a little bit of price differentiation, product differentiation as well. When, for example, they offer an Asian version of the textbook in which all the examples are from Asian markets in finance, for example. So product differentiation is used in markets quite a bit. However, there are some problems with that as well. So one of the most important problems is cannibalization. So when a company is charging different prices for products in this same category, there's a possibility that they might lose market share of one product to the other. So actually, let's just look at an example. Let's say that we have a company, and this company is starting a new line of lipsticks. And basically, they already have an old line of lipsticks. So once they start this new line and it's cheaper than the existing line, then some consumers who are buying the old line will switch to the newer line. So the market share for the older product is going to decrease, and the market share for the newer product will basically absorb this. And if you look at the example with numbers, so let's say that our consumers, they have about $12 that they can spend on buying lipsticks, and the current product that's being offered by the company, it costs $10. And it turns out that the new product is actually cheaper. It costs around $7. Then naturally, some consumers are going to switch from the more expensive product to the less expensive one. So the minimum amount of money they can spend on lipsticks is $12. People who can spend more, well, maybe they can buy both if they want to. But if this happens, then you have to ask yourself the question, why do product differentiation? And the answer is that, although the market share for your old product may decrease, the overall share for your products might increase. And this is actually quite common in the market. And a very good example of that is also from Apple. So when Steve Jobs was planning to introduce iPads into the market, several of his executives were worried that, okay, if we introduce this new product, there's a good chance that the sales of our current products, the Macintosh laptop, are going to fall. And Steve Jobs said that, yeah, I understand. It's possible and it might occur. But the thing is that if I don't introduce this new product, new innovation in the market, then basically we're going to lose the market share to our competitors. So by introducing this new product, we will be expanding the overall market share of our company. And as most of you know, Apple is today a very powerful company, and part of the reason is because of this. So various commentators basically discuss this. They say that cannibalization occurs in the market all the time. So even if you introduce a new product that cannibalizes your old product, if this new product is basically going to take away the market share of your competitors, well, that's fine. Because that way you're increasing your market share at the expense of your competitors. So finally, we come to the discussion part. Andre, do you want to discuss any of the points that were raised in the webinar?
Yes, I have a question, but it's related to its culture challenge, let's say. Because
Yeah.
at the beginning, you said that pricing strategy that is of course, is a very interesting and very important section, very important part, because as you said before, is the only 1P that generates revenue. And I think that is very important in its cultural challenge in order to convince the reader and the audience. So how can we link pricing strategy with entry mode, for example?
Right. So as I discussed before, several of the strategies we discussed, the tactics, we discussed in the webinar basically are suitable for entry level companies. And for students who are participating in the X Culture International Business Proposal Challenge, they can make use of this. What they can do is they can use these tactics to come up with a more sophisticated way in which the company can enter a new market. They can add this, they can use this to understand the behavior of their competitors, because if a certain market has very strong competitors, then there's a possibility they might use similar pricing tactics to basically get to raise barriers against entry of our company. So they have to consider all of these things in their analysis, and they can use pricing tactics to make it more sophisticated. And other than that, pricing tactics can be used by them to basically create market entry strategies. So for example, if you want to penetrate a market, of course you can use penetration pricing, and you can do so. If you do so, you can basically gain a lot of market share. So if there are no strong competitors, that's one option. And you have to be aware of the legal issues involved though. You have to understand that if you engage in something like penetration pricing, then it's possible that it might be confused with predatory pricing. And because of that, you have to be careful about using these tactics. However, I believe that most of the students will be able to accommodate them into their proposals if they think about it intelligently. And as I said before, these are just a few of the tactics. So due to time constraints, I couldn't discuss more. But in fact, the marketing literature is filled with hundreds of tactics. So I hope this answers your question. Do you have any other questions, or should we conclude the webinar?
No, it's fine. Your question was clear, so thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Andre. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. And this is a very interesting topic. So those of you who are watching it and are interested, I suggest you look up pricing tactics. That will be all from me. All right, goodbye. So thank you, Andre, for your cooperation.
You're welcome. Thank you too.
Okay.